Hi, students. Welcome back to another lecture. I thought it would be really beneficial to read aloud and talk through an example essay from a student in a previous semester. Just in thinking about how to best help y'all understand the intricacies of a narrative and what makes a great essay, this seems to be the best solution. So I think the first thing we're going to do is just read it aloud together. And you can find this essay linked at the bottom of your lecture notes as well for any of you who would like to have a copy and take a look at it after this lecture. American. In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate, by Toni Morrison. Racism is the longest pandemic recorded in history, well, in my history, of course. My history of this pandemic doesn't exist in some people's minds. My type of pandemic doesn't catch the government's eye, so they can give us rules and regulations to follow. Society is too rotten to fix racial injustice. They don't care, especially if they have never experienced it. I wanted to make them care, so I decided that the world needed real change. On September 19th, 2020, I got up, showered, and brushed my teeth, did my homework, and soaked in the last few hours of free will I had before my 3 to 10 shift at Walmart. As time passed, 3 rolled around and I clocked in, trying to be in a more positive mood, even though it was the last place I would want to be on a Saturday. After 4 long hours of work, my break finally came. I was so joyous and carefree when I hit the going to meal button on the time clock machine, not knowing what atrocious acts would occur later. My girlfriend and I headed out to get lunch at one of our favorite places, Yamato's. We both got the vegetable plate with spring rolls, which we devoured it like cows. It was the first thing we had eaten that day. Eventually, it was time to head back, so we threw away our trash and headed on our way back to the melancholy reality of being at work on a weekend. As we were driving down New Hope Road around 9 p.m., jamming to music, I noticed that there was a lot of traffic and it was numbingly cold outside. I still tasted the vegetables in my mouth that I'd just finished eating. The air had a feeling of mystery in it. All of a sudden, I heard a sound of a horn coming from a cherry red Silverado truck with a silver outline. I jumped in shock. I had no idea why they were beeping at me. The car then proceeded to get into the right lane beside me, and inside were two young, white, pale, and skinny males. They were both glaring at me with anger like I had stolen their manhood. One of them had yellow bottom teeth, and the other had a butt chin with a patch of hair on it. It seemed as though they were trying to race at me first because they sprouted out in front of the other lane. Once they were in front of me, I saw the back of the truck. I load my AK-47 with liberal tears and white power. When I saw these words, I started to feel sick to my stomach. I rolled down my windows because I felt like I was suffocating with disgust and despair. The air smelled of cigarettes and gasoline, but anything was better than enduring the pain of racism. After I rolled down my window, the man in the cherry truck did the same. But it was clear he was in disgust and despair of the sight of me. He stuck his short white and black tongues out at me, and then he stuck his dirty, undersized, and unkept finger up at me, which was tattooed with a small American flag on it. I was so blind with rage that I didn't even try to hit him with a comeback. He was clearly a racist, and his buddy stayed in the passenger seat, laughing like this was a stand up comedy, and the best he had ever seen at that. The aftertaste of agony was in my mouth. I felt rejected by society, out of place, angry, disgusted with myself and those men. I had so many questions that I didn't seem to know which one I wanted to ask first. Why does racial injustice happen? Why is there more hate than love in the world? Why did anyone who wasn't white, what did anyone that wasn't white do to deserve this treatment? When is it going to end? For most of my life, nobody has been able to answer these difficult questions. I was pissed. I looked up and his raspy voice yelled, "White power," while he held up his short, veiny, and tattooed middle finger again. The finger is hard to forget. It's burned in the back of my brain. He swerved viciously and carelessly into my lane. His goal was to run me off the road. but my driving skills were nearly perfect. At this point, I felt provoked, anxious, and like my skin was boiling from the outside in. I wanted to hurt this man, but most of all, I wanted to cry because I didn't understand how the color of someone's skin could determine the way people treat them. How could someone who didn't know me at any level determine that they didn't like me? How could someone's parents raise their kids to see color when they look at a person and be okay with it? He got into the lane behind me and followed me for a while. Then, at the light right before my left turn, he turned off to the right, but my mind didn't. I had always been followed in stores because I would be suspected of stealing. It was a regular thing for people who looked like me. And then it hit me. I realized this was the first time I'd been severely racially profiled. My mind was left with a bubble of questions and without explanations. It felt like my mind was left in a desert with no water, and it had been there for days. When he turned off, I know that he forgot about everything that happened, and I'm pretty sure he felt good about himself, but he shouldn't have. He felt superior to me because he had just degraded me to where I felt repulsed with myself. Why? I feel like this question will always linger in my mind. This disgraceful event was something that should have never occurred. It was something that the world doesn't care to prevent. Society as a whole doesn't care enough to help change our racist world. Racism is something that has been ignored for many years and is still what drives some people today. It will continue to be a part of our world if no one speaks up. If we continue to argue about which movement is right or wrong, racist or not, we won't get anything done. The world will be the same horrible world where people treat people less than what they deserve. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Martin Luther King Jr. The day the man followed me, racially profiled me, and made me question my own worth was the day I realized the world needed to change. There's a lot to unpack here, and I know that is a um, pretty intense personal narrative. But I felt like it just did such a wonderful job of showing a personal story and a personal example of what someone experienced and knew that the world needed to change in that moment. The thing that I want you to recognize is that this person truly did write a narrative essay. They talked about a moment in time, one situation, one day of their life. While they recognized that they had been racially profiled before and they had experienced racism most of their life, we didn't see multiple scenes and multiple examples of multiple days that this occurred. What this does is it really enables the writer to focus and really unpack the one instance, the one moment. And so we get to feel and see and understand better what they were going through with that particular situation. We see the characters, we see what they ate at Yamato's. So we get this great sense of sensory language of what they were experiencing, even in the restaurant. Those seem like small and minor details, but they really contribute to the overall validity of the story. We believe what the writer is saying. Then, as we see them get in the car, we see them really describe the males, describe the characters that were involved, describe the truck that was profiling them. And then, as we go through the story, we get to see how the writer was feeling during the midst of the story. Now, one thing I want you to really focus on, the writer does not get lost in their own thoughts. That's so easy to do, especially when you're writing about something you're passionate about. But the writer really sticks to telling the story, and then the questions that they ask, the commentary that they make, that's a result of the scene that is occurring. And then finally, as we get to the end, we have this really beautiful closing. This disgraceful event was something that should have never occurred. There's a very clear beginning to the story and a very clear ending. The beginning, in which we see the writer get up, have to go to work with this really great foreshadowing that something bad was getting ready to happen that day. And then we see a closing where they do a really good job of driving back that point of the day they realized that the world needed to change. One thing that I want you to note as we see them shift from scene to scene, we see questions and statements such as this. How could someone's parents raise their kids to see color when they look at a person and be okay with it? He got into the lane behind me. We see the paragraph shift as the scenes shift. And then once more, another example I want to show you right here on page 1. Eventually, it was time to head back, so we threw away our trash, headed back to the melancholy reality of being at work on the weekend. We see their meal ending and then the drive beginning. I want you to pay close attention to those shifts. When you're writing your outline this week, I want you to ask yourself, where is an appropriate place in this story to shift? That is what's truly going to build your paragraph formation. And then just a few things I want to notate. We see the header right here, which is the student's name, my name, the course name and the date, a title. And then in the header section in the top right-hand corner, we see the student's last name and the page number as well. 1-inch margins surround the paper. It's in Times New Roman, and it's clearly double spaced with 12 font. When the student begins a new paragraph, we see a very clear 1/2-inch margin right here that indicates that they're shifting to the next paragraph. And then we see that the student wrote an entire 3 pages going into the 4th page, which meets the page count. So now what I would like to do is pull up the narrative essay outline and tips. And I want to go over this assignment with you. The following outline is typical for developing a narrative essay. After you do your pre-writing, you will be able to insert your content into the format indicated by the outline. Here's a few tips that I've included for narratives, and then what I really want to talk about is this narrative essay outline. Once you get done with this video, I want you to take a look at the notes that I've made below that talk about what builds a great paper. It really emphasizes this idea of paragraph formation. What goes into an introduction? What goes into body paragraphs? What goes into conclusion sentences? When we talk about the introduction, we want to ensure that we include an intention getter and a hook. We want to talk about the significance of the topic, and then we want a very clear thesis. In the essay that we just read, we saw the author begin and end with these really great quotes. They talked and introduced the topic of racism, and then their thesis was very, very clear, where they said that this experience made them realize that the world around them needed to change. The setup talks about the background of the event, and it allows the reader to get an understanding of what's going on. We saw this in our own example where the writer started by talking about going to work and having lunch with his girlfriend. And we saw them set up the premise of what the essay would be about. Then, the beginning and the climax of the event, we saw the actual scene that took place, the driving that happened, what the two gentlemen in the car chose to do, the feelings that were invoked because of that situation. We saw a very detailed description, sensory ideas, and we saw the people that were involved as well. And in the resolution of the event, there was a very clear ending where the writer really emphasizes this idea that what they had been through made them realize that this should never happen, that this should not be something that our world has to deal with on a day to day basis. What I want you to do as you're creating this outline, I want you to use full sentences, but I want you to just briefly start writing down some ideas for each of these sections that will help organize and create the foundation of your essay. If you have any questions, of course, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to Zoom with any of you or have a phone conversation, anything that you think would find helpful as you begin outlining and planning the duration of this essay. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to doing a lecture and talking to many of you next week.